horror history.
Mark Bridger in the tragic disappearance of 5-year-old April Jones back in 2012. So, Bridger, known for spending his days with a drink in hand and watching graphic videos, had a typical evening of drinking before setting out on the road. It's chilling to think about what happened next. He encountered little April Jones, and sadly, she vanished into thin air after getting into his car. The next day, Bridger was arrested, and he admitted to causing April's death, but claimed it was an accident. According to him, he hit her with his car and in a panicked blur, he placed her in his car before seeking help. However, forensic evidence told a different story. Investigators found bone fragments and blood matching April's DNA in Bridger's house, leading them to reject his version of events. They believed he assaulted her before ultimately taking her life, and the court agreed. Bridger was convicted and sentenced to life behind bars. Adding another layer to this tragic saga, Bridger confided in a fellow inmate that he's haunted by visions of April, who appears in his jail cell at night. It's a disturbing glimpse into the psyche of someone capable of such a horrific act. Jose Ferreira, 17, met Carrie and Jopek, 13, at a party in 1982, where they shared a joint. She then invited him to the basement, but as they descended the steps, Jopek expressed doubts about their decision. Despite her hesitation, Ferreira insisted, pushing her down the stairs. Tragically, Jopek's fall resulted in her death. Ferreira, seeing an opportunity, took advantage of the situation before realizing the severity of her injuries. He then removed her body from the house and buried it under a neighbor's porch, where it remained undiscovered for 17 months. Despite the lack of leads, the case remained unsolved for years until Ferreira confessed to the murder after 3 decades. He revealed that the haunting memory of Jopek's death had tormented him since that fateful night, back in 1999 in Hong Kong. So, there was this girl named Man-yee who got into some trouble with a secret gang called the Triad. They said she owed them some money, about 20,000 Hong Kong dollars. What happened next is really sad. These 3 guys from the gang kidnapped Fan and tortured her for a whole month until she died from her injuries. It's terrible, I know. They did some really awful stuff like sawing up her body, boiling the parts, and throwing them away like trash. It's just horrifying to even think about. But here's where it gets interesting. One of these guys had a 13-year-old girlfriend. Let's call her Afan. Now, Afan helped with the torture, which is just unimaginable, right? After all that, she started having nightmares and seeing Fan's ghost everywhere. So, she decided to do something about it. Afan called the police and told them everything. At first, they thought she was just imagining things because she's young. But when they went to investigate where Fan was tortured, they found parts of her body. It's like something out of a movie. But sadly, it was real. Long story short, these gang members got caught. She testified in court and got immunity for her cooperation. The 3 guys were found guilty of manslaughter and got sentenced to life in prison. This guy named Bhim Shankar Giri, and his brother, Jitendra Anantwal Giri, just wouldn't leave Bhim's wife alone. Like, seriously, he kept harassing her despite Bhim telling him to knock it off. So, what does Bhim do? He gets fed up and decides to take matters into his own hands. He invites Jitendra to a party in a secluded spot, and when Jitendra gets a little too tipsy, Bhim ends up doing something unthinkable. He slits his own brother's throat. It's like something out of a crime novel. Bhim tries to cover up his tracks by hiding his brother's body and going into hiding himself. But here's where it gets really eerie. Even after Jitendra goes missing, Bhim starts hearing his brother's voice everywhere. It's like he's haunting him from beyond the grave, even invading Bhim's dreams. One night, Bhim dreams that his brother is choking him and threatening to haunt him for the rest of his days. Talk about a nightmare come to life. Unable to handle the guilt and the constant torment, Bhim finally confesses to his family what he did. They take him to the police, and Bhim ends up getting arrested for his brother's murder. It's a tragic tale of family gone wrong. In 2010, there was this woman named Jennifer Stewart who was brutally killed with an axe in a parking lot. And here's the crazy part. Her murder went unsolved for almost 3 whole years. Then, out of nowhere, this guy named Adrian Daou comes forward and confesses to the crime. But get this, the police weren't totally convinced at first. Some of the things he said didn't quite add up with what they knew about the case. But here's where it gets interesting. Adrian knew a few details about the murder that only the killer would know. So, the cops gave him a cardboard tube and asked him to act out the crime. And guess what? His movements matched exactly how the murder went down. Talk about chilling evidence. But here's the really messed up part. Adrian admitted that he killed Jennifer because he thought it would help him become a better rapper. Yeah, you heard that right. He thought if he did something super crazy like murder someone, it would make his music career take off. Crazy, right? And it gets even crazier. He went to smoke a joint on a bike path, and there, he started seeing Jennifer's ghost flying around him. He claimed he sees her ghost multiple times a day. It's a tragic and disturbing story, reminding us that sometimes, people can do really awful things for the strangest reasons. Back in 2013, there's this guy named Victor Amewugah who hires a taxi driver for a long journey. Seems normal enough, but it's about to get intense. So, halfway through the ride, Victor does something completely unexpected. He pulls out a gun and he kills the driver. Then, he just takes off in the taxi like it's no big deal. But wait, it gets crazier. Not long after, he does the same thing again. He's on a rampage. But here's where things take a spooky turn. The ghost of his second victim starts haunting him. Like, literally haunting him. It's straight out of a horror movie. This ghost won't leave Victor alone. It's in his dreams. It's slapping him while he sleeps. Total nightmare material. This guy couldn't catch a break. The haunting gets so bad that Victor spills the beans to a friend about the murders. Now, props to the friend because they did the right thing. They call the police and tip them off that Victor's driving around in one of the victim's taxis. The police swoop in, catch Victor, and guess what? He confesses to everything. But here's the twist. Victor actually feels remorseful for what he's done. He tells other criminals to change their ways so they don't end up haunted by their victims' ghosts like he was. Talk about a cautionary tale, right? In 1929, it's February 14th, and 7 guys from the North Side gang, including this dude named James Clark, are chilling in a garage, minding their own business. Out of nowhere, 4 guys show up, 2 of them dressed as cops. But guess what? They're not real cops. They line up the gang members against the wall and start shooting. It's a massacre, and all 7 of them end up dead. It's like something straight out of a gangster movie, but it actually happened. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. People think Al Capone, the big boss of the South Side gang, was behind the whole thing. He got arrested a few months later, but that's not where the story ends. See, Capone's time in prison wasn't exactly peaceful. Guards reported hearing him screaming for someone named Jimmy to leave him alone. Creepy, right? And it doesn't stop there. Even after he left prison, Capone couldn't shake off this ghostly presence. He hired a medium to try to get rid of the ghost, but no luck. Later on, his bodyguards would hear him pleading with someone to go away. But when they checked, he was all alone. Turns out, Capone believed he was being haunted by the ghost of James Clark. Can you imagine? It just goes to show, even the toughest gangsters can't escape the spirits of their past. A story from South Africa back in 2002 that'll give you chills. So, there's this guy named Nkuna, and he, along with 2 buddies, did something absolutely terrible. They kidnapped this guy named Bob Baloyi. They tied poor Baloyi up, beat him up real bad, and then did the unthinkable. They doused him with gasoline and set him on fire. It's just horrifying. Anyway, Baloyi's charred remains were found by a cattle herder, who called the cops right away. Nkuna, being the coward he is, fled to another city to dodge the charges. But guess what? He couldn't escape his guilt, because Baloyi's ghost started haunting him. Every night, Nkuna would hear Baloyi's voice, telling him to confess to the family. Talk about spine-tingling stuff, right? So, Nkuna finally decides to come clean to Baloyi's family about what he did. The family calls the cops. Nkuna and his buddies get arrested. But his buddies luck out because charges against them are dropped. Nkuna tries to plead not guilty in court, but the court isn't buying it. They use his confession against him and he ends up getting slapped with a 15-year prison sentence. Daniel French, who wanted some quick cash, you know, the easy money. So, what does he do? He decides to rob a house in a retirement community. Not cool, right? Daniel pretends to be a maintenance worker and sneaks into 87-year-old Barbara Howe's home. But here's where things take a dark turn. He zaps her with a stun gun, but she's tougher than he thought. She doesn't go down without a fight. So, Daniel starts choking her, trying to make her pass out. But Barbara, she's a fighter. She refuses to lose consciousness. Daniel keeps at it until, sadly, Barbara eventually dies. It's just awful. After rifling through her stuff, Daniel only finds $18 and a diamond ring, which he just tosses out of his car window like it's nothing. Barbara's murder stays unsolved for 2 whole years until the cops pieced together enough evidence to nail Daniel. When they question him, he straight up confesses. But get this, he tells the police that he feels terrible about what he did and that he's seen Barbara's ghost. He apologizes to her ghost. In 1987, there's this guy named Terry Childs who did something absolutely horrifying. He stabbed Lois Segala, 17-year-old girl, to death and got slapped with a 41-year prison sentence for it. But wait, it gets even scarier. While Terry was behind bars, he starts confessing to even more murders. One of his victims was Linda Njozovic. He kidnapped her from a parking lot in 1979 and did unspeakable things to her, beating, strangling, and stabbing her repeatedly. It's just chilling. Terry hid Linda's body in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and it took over 10 years to find her remains. But here's where things get really twisted. Terry says he had to confess to all these murders to, get this, free himself from his demons. He claimed he was being haunted by the ghosts of his victims, like they were staring at him from his cell, eating up his brain. He even said Linda's ghost haunted him, but strangely, she disappeared after he confessed to her murder. All these confessions ended up landing Terry with a life sentence without parole. Hey guys, if you're loving these bone-chilling true crime stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on the latest updates and new episodes.